Welcome everyone to SDR Interview. I'm Randy Cauthron, Managing Editor of the Spencer Daily Reporter. Glad to have you with us this week as we talk to Congressman Steve King. He will tackle some questions that were submitted by readers of the paper and folks from around the area through a Facebook suggestion that they submit their questions. Congressman tackles some tough topics, some very topical topics here as we discuss it. The entire interview is shown in its full glory, so there won't be any editing to the actual interview itself. There are a couple of technical hiccups throughout, but the complete content of the interview is there, so please enjoy. Thanks for joining us today to talk a little bit about what's going on in America and the world. It's kind of all intertwined at the moment, and I want to jump right into this. I took some questions from some of our readers. People live within the district, so they are constituents. I verified that before we took the questions. But I wanted to give them a chance to ask, what would you ask the congressman if you could? So, of course, I know you were here meeting with the Chamber Ag Committee this morning. Obviously, that is a huge issue right now with the tariff situation, which is what our first question deals with. It says, how do you think the tariffs will impact Iowa farmers, the Iowa economy, and our nation's economy in the next 5 years, 10 years, and for generations to come?
But it's a very complex question, and of course, part of the answer is it depends on how this plays out. But in the short term, already they've impacted our markets, I believe. And so we're all concerned about this. One of the things, a message that I would send out here across the district is from Larry Kudlow, the Chief Economic Advisor for the President. Now, Larry Kudlow has been a friend for years. He's a free trader at heart. Much of his writings and the words that he said in his program for a long time are about free trade. But he's in the harness of the President as his Chief Economic Advisor. And so here is the advice from Larry Kudlow. That is, let's give the President time to negotiate. We really do have a better hand to play. Our cards are better than the Chinese card, for example. Because I go question, this is Steve King's component of this, and then I'll shift back to Kudlow. But it's that this will be resolved on the question of, do the Chinese need our market more than we need their cheap goods? And I think our hand looks better than theirs. I think they're so dependent upon a U.S. market, admin for the U.S. market. The Chinese economy would have not done anything near the growth that they've done over the last 20 years or so. But if we play our cards just right, then we come out on top. It's unknown yet on how that will be, but in the short term, it's already hurt our farm markets. The tariffs that the Chinese have put on hit this congressional district harder than any other district in America. There are 435 districts, but we produce more pork and more soybeans than anybody else. Of course, that's the central target of the tariffs that the Chinese, the retaliatory tariffs that the Chinese have put on. So how does this play out? Let's see. But what I'm asking is this. Let's stick with the President on this and let him bring this thing to a better conclusion than we think we can see today. But I've said, when the beans start to turn, if we don't see a better result than we're seeing today, it's going to get pretty ugly out here in Corn Belt and soybean country and pork country. And I had a young man in my office yesterday, a Farm Bureau representative, and he said, but what's it going to be like if I fire up my combine and I'm combining $7 beans? I don't want to see that either. I lived through the 80s. We have that memory here on what that was like. That's the short term, so the midterm and long term, who knows? What I'm concerned about is if this goes into a long-term, full-fledged trade war, I'll make the point that there are 7 billion people on the planet. We're on our way to 9 billion people on the planet, and they all have to eat. So these products that we produce are going to be sold somewhere. But we have export lines of transportation and trade that flow over to Asia and particularly into China that are well established and they're efficient. And if we have to replace a China market by sending our soybeans to multiple different locations, we have to reestablish trade routes, reestablish trade negotiations in some of them, and it would diversify. As it gets more complex, we lose efficiency. While that's going on, there's incentives there for Brazil, for example, to up its soybean production. And I was down there a few years ago. They said to me that they could double their soybean production without taking out a single tree. But if they cleared their savannas, they could multiply their soybean acres by a factor of 8. So I don't want to see an incentive for the Brazilians to up their soybean production, because that will suppress our markets for a long, long time to come.
So guys, have you had a chance to talk to President Trump about any concerns with the tariffs and the impact here locally, especially in the 4th District?
Yeah, it's been several months since I've talked directly to him about this issue, but at that time I made the point on here we are with soybean production and pork production, and this is a place where his campaign really got launched.
Yeah.
And so you got to hold Iowa.
Yeah.
And by the way, helping launch him the way we did and supporting him in the general election, that's indicative of what he needs for support across the country. He had indicated that he wouldn't hurt agriculture, but how do you define it? I think it's actually hurt agriculture by now. And yet, the center of this discussion, I think, has been better described by people like Larry Kudlow and Peter Navarro, who is Navarro's his chief negotiator, and Kudlow is his chief economic advisor. Kudlow's been a friend for a long time, and he stopped in my office, and we have good economic chats in there. And Navarro has also been in. Kudlow's ask is this: that give the president time, give him some months to negotiate this and play it out. As we have better cards in our hand than they have in theirs, and the president can bring this to a positive conclusion. And my answer to that is, that's something that's probably okay all the way up until the time that the beans turn. And then when the beans turn, then it gets serious. So that's not very far down the road.
No.
I mean, I'd say if we were to put a date on the calendar, Labor Day. And we come back to work on the Tuesday after Labor Day, we need to have a lot better situation, at least on the near horizon, than we have today. And that's the message I'm taking back to Washington next week as well. And I'll be delivering that thing pretty strongly. So I think the people out here will say, all right, we'll stick with Mr. President, but we can't do that unlimited. And we sure don't want to go into anything that looks like the 80s.
Absolutely. Okay, next question. Your Birthright Citizenship Act, we've been talking about, would disallow U.S. citizenship for some people born in the USA. The 14th Amendment of the Constitution says, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. So how can your bill be constitutional?
Well, because the clause that is included in that quote from the 14th Amendment is the operative clause, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And there's a significant amount of scholarship on that when the 14th Amendment was passed, there was a significant debate going on. This was 1868, and there's a significant debate was going on about who's subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. Well, surely not diplomats or their staff. So if they have babies, they have wives and have babies while they're here, those babies are not citizens of the United States because they're not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. There were Native Americans that would lose their membership in certain tribes if they were American citizens by the charter of the tribe itself. And so that's another reason why they wrote "and subject to the jurisdiction thereof." But the broader part of the scholarship behind that is that subject to the jurisdiction thereof really means owes loyalty to. And so if you have someone who is an illegal alien that sneaks into America to have a baby, and it happens every day, and it happens in this country to the tune of between 330 and 750,000 babies a year born in America where both parents are illegal. They become American citizens by practice, not by law, and not by Constitution. So Birthright Citizenship Act is constitutional, and there are those who think otherwise, and I don't think they've dug into it very deeply, and some of them are pretty good legal thinkers, but once we get into the depths of this, I recognize they don't very often say, oh, you're right, Steve. That doesn't happen in this world that often, but I will recognize that they weren't prepared for those arguments because they had not read into it the details, some of the details that I've described here. So I want to pass birthright citizenship. No other country that I know of does that. There was one other one, the Dominican Republic, and they had a Supreme Court decision that shifted that, so they stopped giving automatic citizenship. But there's a birth tourism industry going on in America, and I haven't looked at these numbers now in several years, but the turnkey price for a pregnant Chinese mother was $30,000 to fly to the United States, say 5-6 months of pregnancy, stay here, go through the whole OBGYN, the full American healthcare treatment, have the baby, that little baby's footprints stamped on the birth certificate, put her and the baby back on the plane, fly her back to China, $30,000 bucks. And then they have their automatic American citizen, whom, once they turn 18, can begin to bring in the family reunification plan and the chain migration. It is an industry that's been developed. I was down at Tucson University Hospital talking with their leadership down there, and they sent a team to Mexico to train them how to do multiple births because they knew they had some of those that were coming, and so that they wouldn't come into America for these multiple births for the automatic citizenship. So they trained the medical people south of the border of Tucson, and one of the mothers that was pregnant with, she had quintuplets. She went into labor, snuck into the United States, showed up at Tucson University Hospital. They had to take care of her, and so she had her 5 babies. They were all okay. They went into intensive care, the neonatal care unit, and the hospital bill was $125,000, which we all paid for, and we got 5 new American citizens out of that deal. I guess it cost us $25,000 each just for the hospital bill. So those things need to stop, and it defies logic to think that anybody that can sneak into America and have a baby then gets an automatic pass for not only that child, but all of the family that would come with the chain migration.
Very good. Question, you've been a very open critic of Russia's leadership and Vladimir Putin, as well as in North Korean leadership and Kim Jong-un. The president has sat down, met with both leaders, has come away with some pretty feel-good comments about each individual there in the nature of diplomacy. Where do you stand on that conversation and this relationship building he's doing with these two leaders that you particularly singled out in the past as not being particularly good humans or individuals?
I have often referred to Kim Jong-un as a chubby little dictator, and so that's he is that, and he is evil, and he's vicious, and he's executed his own family members and others. I don't know how many he's executed since he's come to power in North Korea. That part's brutal. They're a hardcore Marxist society or a Maoist society. I would love to see that change. But the president accepted the invitation to sit down with Kim Jong-un, and that was a bold move. I said I would not have done that. But he did, and it looks like there's a chance that we can come out of this with a very, very positive result. I think what happens when you sit down with somebody that's distasteful and you do that behind closed doors, you find some things that you can agree on. And maybe one of those things that you agree on is that you're not going to walk out that door and undercut the guy you just sat down with. And I think that's what's happened with Kim Jong-un to a degree, and also with Putin. Ironically, it seems as though there's people in this country, and usually they're on the other side of the aisle from me, that will argue that now no one should have ever talked to any Russian ever. And because, let's see, Donald Trump Jr. sat down with a Russian lawyer to listen, got up in 20 minutes and ended the meeting because it had no substance. He spent, 20 hours or so testifying before Congress as to what went on in a 20-minute meeting. And I know Don Jr. We hunted pheasants together last fall, and I think that's an example of I'll say an over-exuberant criticism of anybody that ever talked to a Russian. So I happened to be just a week and a half ago at the OSCE conference in Berlin. So the second time in 10 years we sat down to negotiate with the Russians. And mostly the same faces that I saw 2 years ago when when I last sat down and talked with them. And 2 years ago, we only had an hour. They burned up 45 minutes just talking about platitudes, or just using platitudes. And so I got the floor and I went through the litany of the things that are offensive that the Russians have done, like annexing Crimea and annexing the eastern provinces of Ukraine, shooting down MH17, the passenger airliner over Ukraine, and I went through a number of those things like that. Well, that gets the Russians back up a little bit, but they needed to hear it. This year, I didn't have to bring those things up. The other members of representing the United States brought them up one by one. And so the Russians said, nothing has changed. And so I stepped in and said, oh yeah, there are a couple new things. And I pointed those out. But there was a very tense meeting inside there because of that, and because of the objections we have. The Russians said, well, stop blaming us. And the answer to that is stop violating international law, respect the borders of your neighbors, and tell us that renounce the expansionism that we're seeing by especially military means that the Russians are exhibiting in different places around their borders. So we have that intense kind of discussion. But part of that discussion also was, we need to build better personal relationships between us so that we can talk to each other and humanize all of this so that we can take the temperature down. That's really hard to do with the Russians. I've built relationships with people from, I couldn't count the number of countries. But the Russians, even afterwards, the handshakes afterwards, it's like, all right, we got to get this done. But it was a grudge match. And we're going to get out the door, and the private conversations did not take place, I know of, with anybody that was in that room. 9 Russians and probably 8 or 10 members of Congress, House and Senate.
Give me an opportunity to respond to something. You've taken heat from groups about having a Confederate flag on your desk, about relationships or retweets of people who've seen it's connected to white supremacists or excited those thoughts. Respond to people who have that feeling that you are racist because of these affiliations and because of the flag and those sort of things. How do you address that?
Well, the first thing is that of all those allegations, and I don't even repeat the words, because if I were to start defending myself for those allegations, that would be a never-ending conversation. They will just hurl another name and another allegation, and then it's playing defense constantly. They devalue themselves by making those allegations, and they devalue the effect of those words by using them in those allegations. As far as the Confederate flag is concerned, people seem to overlook that I have a Bible in my coffee table on my desk, or right beside my desk, that was carried by my great uncle John Richardson for 3 years in his fight in the Civil War to put an end to the South. And my family goes back to Abraham Lincoln, and my family were going back in that period of time. On my mother's side were abolitionists. And so my great-grandfather, 5 times great, went off to war with my Uncle John Richardson. He didn't survive the war, so we lost all of his. But my great-uncle is there in my coffee table. And I revere the Union, and of course Abraham Lincoln, absolutely. But this Confederate flag has never been, I'll say, in this contemporary era, not a symbol of slavery. You can type in, I'll just ask people to do this, type slavery into a Google search and hit images and see what the picture is. There'll be pictures of slaves, maybe being whipped, maybe being worked. A lot of them will be black and white. It shows a brutal history of slavery that was rejected by my ancestors and rejected by me. But if you type in Southern Pride, almost every image you see will be an image of a Confederate flag or a Confederate battle flag. It's that image has always been about Southern pride. And so when the Democrats decided to make an issue about it and inject they were throwing amendment after amendment into every debate against the Confederate flag. And the Southern Republicans especially curled up and hid from that debate. Nobody would go down there and challenge them. They were so afraid of being called a racist. And I saw that going on. I went down to the floor and I gave a speech down there. Let anybody go find it. About 2 years ago last summer, and when that began. And I just took them all on for that. And I said 600,000, almost all of them white Americans, died in the battle to end slavery. And I haven't heard any of those folks in the self-segregating Congressional Black Caucus say thank you for all the blood that was spilled to end slavery. But the Confederate flag today, it is a symbol of Southern pride, and it's now a symbol of freedom of speech that they tried to take down. If I have to watch an American flag burn because somebody wants to use it to express themselves because the Supreme Court has ruled that that's freedom of speech, those same people that will insist we should be allowed to burn American flags and protest against our country, or trample on it, or drag it behind the vehicle in the dirt, those same people are the ones that say, if you have a Confederate flag, then that's a certain symbol that, you know, you're one of those words that I don't repeat or defend from. But I want people to know, for me, I went down and I stood alone, and I stood for freedom of speech, and I defended the history that has ended slavery, and that's part of the legacy for my family. I don't get any credit for what they did ahead of me. Nobody gets credit for what somebody did ahead of me, but it's part of the legacy that was passed on to me, and that's why that sits there. I took it down last summer when the 2 Des Moines police officers were executed in that horrible tragedy because the perpetrator had used a Confederate flag to gin up some controversy at a football game the Friday before this happened, and I thought, I don't want this to get tied with that, and so I took it down. Randy, let me just, I don't think I only answered part of that question. And you know, all the rest of this, just this morning, I guess it was late last night, I retweeted a Huffington Post article. They have a long article there, I don't know how many words it is, I guess 1,600 words or so, and they go through this whole litany. And so I just took their article. It's just a big attack on me. I just took the whole article and I tweeted it back out. People think, why would you do that? I want people to see how bad the criticism, how bad the critics are, how dishonest. And in that tweet, I put a text in there that says, the text of the tweet says that if I were to redact everything in this article that are blatant lies, this would look like Congress had subpoenaed an FBI document on Hillary Clinton. There'd be nothing left to read. We get these documents from the FBI when we're trying to do this investigation. They're so redacted, there's nothing left to read. That's what that article would be like. They're in the business of trying to muzzle me because the position I take is effective. When they'll say white nationalist. Well, I can't help my color of my skin. They're always going to be able to call me white, I guess. Is there anything wrong with being a nationalist? That means patriotism. That means supporting America. That means supporting the American tradition. And the values that we have, the common history that we share, the God-given liberty, the pillars of American exceptionalism. Nobody in Congress talks about American exceptionalism as often or in a way that I do. And nobody in Congress takes on these cultural issues because they get treated the same way I get treated. But if we continue to back up from that, if we're going to step up and apologize because they say they're offended, then their leftist agenda prevails in this country and we lose our freedom. They hate freedom of speech. For example, they've been tearing down the family. They are pro-abortion. They're for a weak America when it comes to militarily. They believe in a socialized, I'll say a socialized economy, a managed economy. All the things that made America great are under assault from the left. They are an offense to the traditions of America. And we have too many people that say they're for these values I've just expressed, but they're afraid to stand up to them. I run to the battle rather than run from it.
One of the questions that I have in here kind of talks about people who are critical of your stances and beliefs. Somebody in here argued that you shouldn't have your job anymore because you haven't got a bill passed and those sort of things. Questioning your effectiveness in Washington, I guess, is essentially what the question is. How would you respond to that claim?
Well, of course, that's not true. And anybody that wants to do the research can determine that. And that's just an allegation that's been made by the left for a long time, and it's an example of the kind of people they are. But would you really say to somebody, you ought not have your job because you didn't pass enough bills? And during that time that this began, Jeff Flake was running for Senate in Arizona, and he got accused of not passing bills. So his staff went back and did the research, and they said, but bills and amendments are the same thing. Lots of times we take a whole bill and we put it in an amendment form and get that passed on the floor. Well, they ran a whole spreadsheet of this out, and since that time my staff has kept it up. When you calculate in amendments, I happen to be not as important to pass bills as it is to kill bad ideas. And I don't know if anybody has done more damage to kill bad ideas than I have. The Attorney General Jeff Sessions was here in Northwest Iowa not that long ago, before he was named as Attorney General. I wasn't even in the room, but it got fed back to me that he had said that he never saw anybody in Congress get so much done and get so little credit as Steve King. And so that's a little bit how that is. But if I'm ineffective, why does the left want to get rid of me? I'd ask them that back in return.
So when you get back to Washington, priorities. What is top priority for you right now?
Finish the Farm Bill. Get it done by September 30th without extension. Get it done. I don't want it hanging off till the election time. I want it done. I want it packaged up. I want it signed into law. I want our producers to know that when they're doing their fall tillage, what next year is going to look like for them. And it'd be nice if we could get it done sooner, but we're not. It's going to be an intense effort to get it concluded by September 30th, and there are pessimists out there that think it's not going to happen.
Well, good luck. Andrea's standing up. I think that means we're done. I'm pretty good with body language,
Yes.
So I think we're finished.
Even if you were completely incapable of body language, you still read Andrea's.
Yeah, that's right. Well, thank you very much, Congressman.
Thanks a lot,
I always
Randy.
appreciate you sitting down with us. So we'll see you next time you're in town, hopefully.
Glad to do it. We've had some good conversations in this town. We'll do some more.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks, Randy.